Imagine a food component so powerful that it has been labeled as lifespan essential and even lovingly coined the fountain of youth. What could hold such power? Polyphenols. Welcome to Return to Eden. I'm Kendra Han, fitness and nutrition specialist, here in studio again with my friend Jamie Woodle, integrative nutrition health coach and master of health science education. The topic of polyphenols has been all over the place. So Jamie, what is the hype behind a polyphenol?
So polyphenols are colorful components found in fruits, vegetables, seeds, beans, and they're important because they have the ability to work as an antioxidant, and also they have antimicrobial properties as well.
And that includes some spices too, right?
Yeah.
Like different herbs?
Yes, even spices. It's so fascinating. Who would have thought? But these polyphenols are critically important for reducing oxidative stress, lowering chronic inflammation, and delaying the development of age-related diseases such as heart disease and cancer.
And this is thought to be one of the biggest contributing factors to the longevity and the quality of life that people are experiencing in these blue zones.
Yes, they definitely think it's a huge contributor. And polyphenols are being studied heavily right now, not just for their disease-delaying capabilities, but also they're being looked at to see if they could be possibly therapeutic, being used in conjunction with things like cancer treatment.
What gifts God has given us in the natural ability to heal our bodies with the plants of the earth. This is why it is so important to eat the rainbow. Are all of the colorful fruits and vegetables high in polyphenols, or is this something that's unique to specific things?
Yes, it is a little bit different per fruit and vegetable. In fact, there's some research that was done and they tested 100 different food items. So obviously not every single item was tested, but they did find that it varies significantly. Actually, on the top of the list of the 100 that they studied, the number one was cloves. Cloves. Now,
wow.
We're not eating spoonfuls of cloves, but having spices put into your food can make a big difference over time, because not just was cloves at the top, there was also star anise, peppermint, oregano, and cocoa powder.
Yes.
I love chocolate. Yes. But it's important to note that they were testing cocoa powder, which has been processed from the cacao bean. So something important to note is that when the cacao bean is processed into cocoa powder, it loses a significant amount of its polyphenols in that process. So if cocoa powder is so high on the list, can you imagine if they had tested the cacao bean itself, how high that might be?
That reminds me of that trail mix that you brought in not very long ago. It had like goji berries and little, you called them cacao nibs. Mm-hmm. And I love dark chocolate. That's one of my favorites. And it has almost the exact same taste as my favorite types of dark chocolate. So very impressed in case you ever want to bring trail mix.
And then you can skip out on the added sugar and everything. It gives you just a hint of that chocolate flavor that we love. And there is some interesting research being done right now. There are some theories that eating cacao nibs, possibly because they're so high in polyphenols, could actually help stimulate stem cell regeneration.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, the benefits of polyphenols just keep building and building and building. So what about fruits? Because I am a big pusher of fruit when it comes to my kids over candy. We're really trying to motivate them in that direction. So which fruits are the highest?
Well, the highest on the list was blueberries.
Oh, good.
Yes. Several berries were very high on the list, actually. And then right under berries, we'll find plums.
Another favorite in my household.
So I was looking into this research and all these foods that were tested. And as I share the information today, I will break it down into categories. So first, I'd like to talk about beverages. And I'm sure you have some guesses. If you had to guess, what do you think would be the highest in beverages?
Probably green tea.
Yes. Coffee was first, and then green tea. Absolutely. They are packed with powerful polyphenols. In fact, another fun fact is that green tea, they're finding feed our good bacteria in our gut. And there were a lot of nuts and seeds that made the list as well, like flax seeds, hazelnuts, chestnuts, and pecans, although my husband would argue that it is pecans.
I think that's very much like an area type of thing. We're pecan people myself.
I am a pecan person. I'm from Oregon, though, but my husband is from South Carolina, and till the day he dies, it will be pecans. And we're both trying to persuade our children on which way they should pronounce it. It's quite fun in our house. But yes, nuts and seeds were very high on the list.
So we've talked about fruits, we talked about nuts and beverages. What about vegetables? Which vegetables are highest?
So of the vegetables, green olives and black olives were the highest, which is interesting.
That
because,
is really interesting.
We just started selling olive oil, and we both agree it is one of our favorite products because it is so robust in flavor.
If you'd like to get your bottle of the Eden's Essentials olive oil, visit our website or give us a phone call to place your order.
Under olives were red onion, spinach, and artichokes as well.
All of those things are really featured prominently in the Mediterranean diet, so that makes sense that that's one of the healthiest diets overall.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at the blue zones, they're eating a lot of things like olives, and beans are also noteworthy and a superfood in their own right. And you'll find that both black and white beans are quite high on the list as well.
It's no wonder then that these people in blue zones are living so long when such a huge part of their diet is built around foods that have such high levels of polyphenols. Jamie, you are great at taking the information that you get through your research and making real life changes with that. I love your idea of fermented food day. For one, I've definitely stolen the add beans to your tacos to sub for part of the meat products. But as it pertains to this information, what changes have you made in your life to increase your own longevity?
Well, in our household, we've definitely switched to using a lot of olive oil, with the exception of any high heat cooking.
Right.
In which case we use avocado oil because it has a higher smoke point. But olive oil I use for near everything, all of my cooking. We also snack on black olives. My daughter loves black olives. So also I started making that superfood trail mix like you were talking about that had pumpkin seeds and several different kinds of nuts, and it had some apricots and some
goji berries.
Goji berries.
I had never tried a goji berry.
And it's important to note that if you get goji berries, make sure they're organic. They're finding a lot of non-organic goji berries are very high in heavy metals.
Oh, I didn't realize that. But I always know I can trust the snacks that you bring in. You're so deliberate in your choices. And it wouldn't hurt my feelings if some more of that trail mix appeared in our office.
Yeah. Maybe with a little extra cacao nibs in there.
Just a few.
Just for you.
Just,
Well, there are two other foods as well that we've been incorporating more at home, and they are definitely worth mentioning, and one is mushrooms. So, for example, I've been using that in a lot of our dishes to bulk them up, as well as beans.
Yeah.
And sometimes even I will skip the meat and I will use some mushrooms. And another controversial item is organic tofu.
That one is hard for me because I don't really know how to prepare it. I enjoy it. I like it. I've had it in soups and stuff, but I heard some, like you said, controversial research, and I wasn't super confident about the benefits of tofu.
Yeah, there's been some controversial information out there. For a while, they were talking about there being phytoestrogens or plant estrogens that our body can utilize, and they were afraid that that would cause us to, especially women, that we would have too much estrogen. But when you really study the regions of the world who eat a lot of tofu or a lot of soybeans like edamame, they have a lower rate of cancer and disease.
That's definitely true. And I also read that research about there being potential for hormonal imbalances.
So soybeans or tofu has been eaten for at least 7,000 years. And not only are those cultures having lower rates of things like cancer, but they're finding now in some of the newer research that people who eat tofu or soybeans in a more whole form like tempeh or edamame, they actually have fewer menopause symptoms, and they may even lower the risk for some kinds of cancers. And it's important to note that several of the national cancer societies have quietly removed the cautions that they put out there on soy.
Funny that they do that so quietly when they're so very loud with placing them there in the first place.
Yes. Well, and it's just because we learn new things and then we have to adjust.
Yeah.
Like we've spoken before, I think, about how they used to recommend types of cigarettes. And for a long time, it was don't eat eggs because they cause high cholesterol. And then we find out, it's not cholesterol from food that causes high cholesterol.
Right.
It's actually spiking of blood sugar and eating a high carbohydrate diet. So then they had to fix the food pyramid because, maybe we shouldn't be eating 11 servings of grains. And so it's just as research develops and we hypothesize and we observe and we try to interpret what we're observing, it's just the longer we observe, the more we understand. And so, of course, it's all evidence-based or science-based. But the thing is that as we do more research and we do more observation, then our understanding increases. And sometimes we have to change the information that we put out there. And I think it's important to note that, especially here in America, if you're going to have things like edamame or maybe tofu, you want to make sure it's organic, especially if it's sourced here in America, because the large majority of our soybeans are genetically modified or they've been doused in pesticides or both. And so you definitely want to go for the organic kind. In these cultures, they're eating soy in its more whole form.
Right.
So organic tofu, tempeh, edamame. Whereas if you look at a lot of the foods here in America, if you read the labels, you see a lot of soy products that have been processed, and those can often be inflammatory. So try to avoid those.
So what exactly are microplastics and why should I be concerned about them?
Well, microplastics are as they sound. They are tiny pieces of plastic debris that we end up consuming or inhaling. And these particles can be anywhere from 5 millimeters clear down to nanoparticles. And those are the ones specifically they're finding in the brain, or the nanoparticles.
Wow. So how do we get exposed to these microplastics?
So we're exposed through the degradation of materials. When they get abrasions, you're using them, they're getting old, brittle, they're breaking down. And this can come from anything like cosmetics, clothing, food utensils, food packaging, tools maybe like a cutting board.
The clothing thing is something I hadn't considered previously, and that can happen through washing and heating up those things, right?
Yeah, and it's really concerning because over time, we have this heavy exposure from everywhere, every environment, and these things accumulate in our bodies, and our bodies are not well equipped to eliminate them. And it's not just the accumulation of these microplastic particles in our bodies, but it's actually the chemicals within the plastic particles that are harmful to our health. So these plastic particles have things in them called forever chemicals, also known as PFAs. They also contain BPA or other forms like it, and they contain phthalates. And these things are harmful to our health because they really disrupt the way that our hormones are produced, the way our hormones function. And this can lead to things like infertility, metabolic disease, obesity, and even thyroid issues.
So we're exposed through anything that contains plastic? I mean, that's a really long list of things in this age of disposable everything.
Yeah, and it's starting to be tested. So for example, in the peer-reviewed scientific journal Molecules, they have estimated that we probably consume around 5,520 microparticles for every 5 to 10 takeouts that you get. Because when you think about it, we eat out a lot, and sometimes we got to take it to go, and they're often in some type of plastic or styrofoam container, and this accumulates in our body over time.
My question is, does that include things that are labeled as microwave or dishwasher safe, like the plastic containers that we do meal prep in and things like that?
Yes, and studies are showing that if you microwave your food in plastic or styrofoam, it exponentially increases your exposure to these microplastics and forever chemicals. So forever chemicals are not just in these microplastics, but they're also found in the grease-proof paper products like paper plates. They're also found in stain-resistant clothing, stain-resistant furniture, and you can even find them in like Easy Glide floss and seafood. The exposure is so constant that the CDC has estimated that Every American has these forever chemicals or PFAs in our blood.
Every American.
Yeah, and they're even finding it in breast milk and the umbilical cord blood.
Earlier, you were saying that one of the problems with these microplastics and chemicals is that they are highly carcinogenic and they disrupt our hormones. Can you explain that a little more?
Yes, well, they really cause a lot of cellular damage, oxidative stress, inflammation, and this cellular damage can lead to immune dysfunctions. That, again, causes the hormone disruptions because your cells aren't functioning correctly, and it can even lead to the development of cancer. In a lot of ways, it may feel like we're guinea pigs because over decades, we've been exposed to these plastics and these chemicals without knowing. And we're just now doing research and finding that the accumulation of these chemicals is leading to things like neurotoxicity, alterations in the gut microbiome, the development of cardiovascular disease, and cancer, as we mentioned before.
The amount of the exposures and the gravity of the consequences of those is so just overwhelming at this stage. What, if anything, can be done to combat that? I know that a lot of companies are now shying away from using those BPAs and phthalates, but what can we do as individuals?
So our understanding of microplastics and how it's affecting our body is still in the really early stages of beginning to discover what's happening. And so right now there are no federal laws in the United States that are telling manufacturers that they need to warn us of the chemicals in their products. And that's why several things say microwave safe. There are also no federal laws saying that there needs to be safety testing on the products. So some companies are choosing to go ahead and start swapping out some of their materials. Unfortunately, the chemicals that they're swapping out are so unstudied, we don't know if they are any safer or more harmful or just as harmful. So some states are beginning to pass regulations, though. So for example, California has passed some regulations that is beginning to phase out some chemicals that are used in products sold in that state.
And even with the baby products, though, that didn't happen until, 2012?
Yeah, in 2012, the FDA finally banned BPA from baby bottles, but they just replaced it with some other chemical. There are some states and local governments that are just beginning to put regulations on things. You may have been to a store where you can no longer use the single-use plastic bags, or maybe you have to pay for them. And I think they're hoping that, less will get used and less will be put into the environment and therefore into our bodies.
Right.
Also, the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, has recently set limits on 6 of the forever chemicals in drinking water because they're estimating that over 105 million people right now have over the limits of PFAs or forever chemicals in their drinking water.
What can we do to reduce our own exposure to those harmful microplastics?
So there are a lot of things that are out of our control in our environment, and we cannot live our lives stressing and worrying about everything. We just can't. That's not a very good quality of life. So let's focus on the things that we can control. And I would suggest starting in your kitchen, because when you think about it, where is the most plastic that we consume? It's in our kitchen.
Right.
Food storage containers, plastic utensils and spatulas, paper plates covered in grease-proof coating. So think about all the things in your kitchen that you could begin to swap out. So you might consider things like stainless steel cups or glass cups or tumblers. You might look at your cooking pans, and you could look into cast iron. They're ceramic coated. And definitely do not ever heat anything in plastic.
Or those paper plates.
Yes.
One of the most simple changes that I made was getting rid of those plastic cutting boards. We've switched to using wooden cutting boards instead of the plastic, and mixing bowls too. Swapping my mixing bowls out for ceramic and glass mixing bowls has been a pretty easy change, and it makes me feel better when I'm cooking for my family as well.
We've made similar changes in our kitchen. So we have decided to use less paper plates. And when we buy paper plates now, they are the compostable ones that haven't been sprayed with that grease-proof coating. We also have switched to distilling our own water.
That's a good point to be made too, because a lot of those microplastics we've discussed during the research stages of this are found in your drinking water that's supposed to be safe.
Exactly. And I would also suggest not making popcorn in the microwave. Try to use a stovetop or maybe even an air popper could give you a little less exposure than heating something up. Also, when it comes to seafood, we know there's a lot of plastic in the ocean. Most of us have seen the videos of these islands of plastic floating in the ocean. So it's even worse, though, in farmed seafood. So try to look for wild-caught seafood as much as you can. Obviously, we can't guarantee that any of the animal sources are free from microplastics, but hopefully out in the ocean would be better than farmed.
A lower concentration.
Yeah.
The popcorn thing was really surprising to me because in my mind, I'm like, well, it's in a paper bag. Why would that be a risk for microplastics? But you're absolutely right. That lining that keeps the butter from seeping through. And that leads me to wonder about those little cardboard milk cartons that all of our kids get in school, canned goods.
Yeah.
All of these things have that protective plastic coating on the inside that's just right up against what we're consuming every single day.
Yeah, and I know a lot of companies, we talked about this last show, have switched away from using BPA and now they'll market it as BPA free. But what chemical have they switched it with?
Which brings us back to the feeling like a bunch of guinea pigs. And, who knows in 10 years or 20 years what kind of ramifications our children are going to experience because of this experimentation that we all seem so comfortable with.
Right.
And talking about how comfortable we all seem with the consumption of these microplastics, I'm just thinking back to every time I maybe left my water bottle in my car and then continued to use it, or cut things on one of those coated paper plates because I just didn't want to deal with washing the cutting board. And so that feels very scary to me.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, is there hope? Like, what can we do to shed some of those toxins from our bodies, if anything?
So there's really not a lot that we know of that we can do right now. A lot of the research that has been pumped into microplastics is really looking at the environment and how we can clean that up, which is good. That's important.
Right. It's part of the process.
Yes, exactly. So now they're really trying to look at what do we do about cleaning up our bodies now? So unfortunately, the only real evidence-based study that's been done was a randomized control trial that was published in JAMA, and this was done in Australia on 285 firefighters. Now, these firefighters had high levels of PFAs or forever chemicals because of their exposure to firefighting foam, which is very, very high in these chemicals. So these 285 firefighters were divided into one of three groups. One group donated plasma every 6 weeks for a whole year. Another group donated blood every 6 weeks for a year. And then the third group was the control group where there was nothing being done. They just lived life as normal and they were observed. Well, after 12 months, they retested the blood and they found that the group that donated plasma every 6 weeks had a significant reduction in the amount of forever chemicals in their blood.
Oh.
And not quite as significant, but the ones who donated blood and not plasma also had a bit of a reduction. And then the group that they just observed, there was no change. They still had high levels.
Well, at least that's something. I mean, even a glimmer of hope is still hope. And my prayer would be that we continue those researches and we keep doing these studies so that our children don't have to pay the price for this convenience lifestyle that we were so committed to living.
Yes. And I'm really excited, though, to talk about some preliminary research that's coming out. I wouldn't say it's evidence-based, take it to the bank right now, but some very interesting things are coming out. And the reason why I say don't take it to the bank is because they're done in vitro or in animal studies, and they haven't been done in humans to see. But they're finding that some of the probiotics that they were studying were actually degrading the plastic. When they studied them in the lab and in animal studies, these probiotics bind to and help degrade the microplastics. And these are Lactobacillus rhamnosus, Lactobacillus acidophilus, and Lactobacillus plantarum. So we cannot stress enough to probably be eating fermented foods and taking probiotics, because even though they haven't done the study on humans yet, we already know that those probiotics are crucial for a healthy gut microbiome.
Absolutely.
And the third thing that can be done is to eat plenty of fiber. And the idea behind this is when you eat fiber, it keeps things moving in your digestive system. And the less time that those plastics have to sit in your digestive system, leaching those forever chemicals, the better. So eating fiber, keep things moving through quickly so they don't have too much time to sit in there and harm our health.
Thank you so much for those glimmers of hope, Jamie. And hopefully those animal studies lead to more human trials and we can really start to combat those microplastics and forever chemicals in a proactive way. We are all out of time again. Thank you for joining us in this discussion of microplastics and how to remediate the damage we have already done. Thank you for joining us. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or topics you'd like to see me and Jamie discuss, leave a comment below. Have a blessed day.